The 2010s were an amazing time to be an NBA fan. You have all these crazy storylines, a ton of player movement, and some really great teams, championship teams, repeat champions. But what happened to every single champion of the 2010s? How did it all fall apart? How did they get from where they were to where they are now? Let's begin with the 2010 champions, the LA Lakers. After a few down years as they struggled to transition out of the Shaq and Kobe era into just the Kobe era, by the late 2000s, the Lakers found themselves in contention status once again. By far, the biggest move that helped them get there was trading for big man Pau Gasol at the 2008 trade deadline, a move that came as a complete shock to most people around the league. Gasol was a young all-star big that would have commanded a significant trade haul in return, yet he was simply moved to the Lakers without the rest of the league even knowing he was truly available for really not that much in return. A move that conspiracy theorists within the league still speculate was an inside deal between the Grizzlies front office and the Lakers. With the addition of Gasol to go with Kobe, Lamar Odom, and Andrew Bynum, the Lakers had everything they needed to push for a title once again. Led by the great Phil Jackson, they lost in 6 games to the Celtics in the 2008 playoffs just a few months after trading for Gasol, but went on to win the title in just 5 games against the Magic in 2009. However, this section is about the 2010 title. That season, they mostly avoided the only thing that could really slow them down in the West: injuries, with both Gasol and Bynum playing over 60 games in the regular season and all 23 playoff games. Even though they lost an important wing in Trevor Ariza the prior offseason, they managed to bring in, at the time named, Ron Artest to replace him, and the championship core was set: Kobe, Gasol, Bynum, Odom, Artest, and Derek Fisher, a group with too much size and skill for almost any team in the league to deal with. They made it back to the finals and faced a familiar foe, the Boston Celtics, the same team that beat them in 2008 and that generally had a reputation as just a tougher, more physical team. In a grueling 7-game series, the Lakers ultimately came out on top, with Artest hitting a huge 3 in an ugly Game 7 to win the title, with Kobe winning his 5th and final championship, along with another Finals MVP award. And unfortunately for the franchise, that was about as good as things would get for a while. They were really good in the following season, with Phil Jackson deciding to come back for one more year, as they went on to win 57 games despite some health issues from Bynum. However, things would come crashing down in round 2 of those playoffs as they got swept and completely embarrassed by the Dallas Mavericks, and that was truly the end of an era for the Lakers. Jackson retired following that season, and things got really weird with the team. The league was in a lockout and the season started late, so in December, the Lakers agreed to a deal to trade for Chris Paul from the Hornets, sending out both Pau Gasol and Lamar Odom to give Kobe one of the best guards in the league as his backcourt partner. That trade was ultimately vetoed by the league, however, and despite a solid record that season, they once again lost in the second round of the playoffs. In the 2012 offseason, they once again attempted to shake up the roster, trading for Dwight Howard and Steve Nash while dumping Bynum and Odom. A complete disaster that is now known as one of the worst super team experiments of all time. They disappointed the entire season, got swept in the first round of the playoffs, and wouldn't return to the postseason for another 6 years. This era of the Lakers is a perfect example of why putting together a dynasty is so difficult in the NBA. They tried to keep things going through roster changes, injuries, coaching changes, but sustained contention is incredibly difficult to maintain through all of those things, as the Lakers and their fans found out. Next up is one of my favorite championship teams of all time, the 2011 Dallas Mavericks. At the time, there wasn't much of an indication that this was a championship caliber team at all. Since losing the 2006 finals to the Heat, the Mavs had won just 1 playoff series in the 4 postseasons since, leading up to the 2011 playoffs. They were led, of course, by Dirk Nowitzki. He was still one of the best bigs in the league, but was also 32 years old and had a spotty track record in terms of team postseason performance. And when you look at the roster of this team, it was a weird aging group around Dirk. They had 33-year-old Jason Terry, 32-year-old Sean Marion, 37-year-old Jason Kidd, with some young guys like JJ Barea and Tyson Chandler mixed in there. But again, the expectation for this team was not to win a title. But the Chandler addition was a massive part of this, and without him, I honestly don't think they would have won the title in 2011. In 2009, Chandler was supposed to be traded from New Orleans to Oklahoma City, but failed his physical due to an injury, which canceled the trade. Instead, he was sent to the Bobcats that offseason, and then in the 2010 offseason, they dumped him for basically nothing, and in Dallas, he became one of the best defensive players in the entire league, a perfect rim protecting and rebounding fit alongside Dirk in the front court that they might not have ever added to the team without those crazy set of circumstances. They went into the 2011 playoffs as the 3 seed, but both the Spurs and the Lakers were seen as the true championship teams, and they were much better at the time. They beat Portland in 6 in round 1, swept the Lakers in round 2, as I mentioned mentioned in the previous section was a huge shock, beat the young Thunder in 5 games in the conference finals, and then faced their toughest test yet, the LeBron, Wade, Bosh Heatles in year 1 in the finals. Despite a really weird season in Miami, the Heat were unbelievably talented and lost just 3 playoff games on their way to the finals. It was hard to imagine a bigger mismatch for Dallas with their aging roster and only one true star in Dirk against the most talented trio the league had ever seen to that point. However, Dirk and that Mavs team were simply incredible all postseason long, and that continued in the finals. The Heat had no answer for Dirk and the timely shot making of the role players, combined with their fantastic defense led by Chandler and Marion. They also forced LeBron into by far his worst finals performance of all time, as he allowed a guy like JJ Barea of all people to shut him down in the finals. Dirk averaged 26 a game in the finals, capping off of an incredible postseason run to finally win his first title, one of the most memorable and unlikely championship runs in the history of the league. Unfortunately for them, that would be the last playoff series win for the Mavs for the next decade. They lost some key role players in the following offseason, including Tyson Chandler, one of the key pieces to the title in the first place. They were never able to recover from that offseason as their defense completely fell apart while Dirk continued to age. They put together some decent seasons while Dirk was still really good, but slowly but surely they transitioned into a new era as Dirk retired in 2019. And honestly, they didn't really do anything wrong to lose their championship team other than let Chandler leave in 2011, because honestly there was no way they were going to replicate the magic that they had tapped into that postseason. Speaking of those Heat teams, as we move forward in the decade, we of course have to talk about the back-to-back champion 2012-2013 Miami Heat. They of course were led by LeBron, Wade, and Bosh after signing in the 2010 offseason, but as we just covered, that first season did not go as planned. It was clearly championship or bust for such a talented team, and that weird final series set up a very stressful 2011-12 season for them. At the time, the mindset was that if they disappointed again, big changes could be in store for the team, most likely resulting in trading Chris Bosh and breaking up the Big Three after just 2 seasons. They didn't make any significant changes in the offseason, instead counting on another year together and more chemistry being enough to put them over the top, and of course they were right. They won 46 games in the lockout-shortened 2011-12 season and went into that postseason as the 2 seed in the East behind the Chicago Bulls. They did have some issues with the Pacers in the second round, and they were really the biggest competition in the East during this era because the Bulls simply could not stay healthy in the postseason. They got past the Pacers in 6 and then faced their toughest test of the entire season in the conference finals, the Boston Celtics. They were an aging team at this point, but one with championship experience and a lot of toughness. After going down 3-2 in the series, LeBron simply would not let his team lose the series, putting up 45 points on the road in Game 6 and closing it out in Game 7 to get the Heat back to the finals. Waiting for them was the 2 seed in the West, the young Oklahoma City Thunder, led by 3 future MVPs in Kevin Durant, Russell Westbrook, and James Harden. Despite only lasting 5 games, that series was much closer than most people remember, especially in the beginning, but ultimately the Thunder couldn't overcome their inexperience, and LeBron finally won his first NBA championship. Going into the following season, the Heat were seen as the favorites and certainly did not disappoint in the regular season. They won 66 games, including the second longest winning streak in NBA history at 27 games in a row. They entered the playoffs as the 1 seed, cruising to the conference finals, where they had to deal with an even better Pacers team than the year before. It was a really tough series and a breakout moment for Paul George, but the Heat ultimately won in 7 to advance to the finals once again for the 3rd straight year. Waiting for them this time was a much different challenge than the year before, the San Antonio Spurs. In many ways, they were the opposite of the Thunder, with tons of championship experience and veteran talent. After a hard-fought series, it looked like the Spurs were going to close it out in Game 6 at home before the big addition from the offseason for the Heat saved their entire season with one of the most clutch shots in the history of the league. Ray Allen hit a corner 3 to tie the game as the Heat survived Game 6 and went on to win Game 7 at home, becoming one of the few teams in the history of the league to repeat as champions. However, the Spurs would come back the following year and get their revenge, destroying the Heat in the 2014 finals, ultimately ending the LeBron era in Miami. He returned to the Cavs in free agency that offseason, and things were just never the same as the roster continued to age. Bosh and Wade both struggled to stay on the floor in the 14-15 season, and even though they attempted to rebuild the roster with additions like Goran Dragic and Luol Deng, after missing the playoffs and some pretty average seasons afterwards, Wade would decide to leave the Heat for the Bulls in free agency in 2016, while Bosh was forced to retire from basketball due to health issues shortly afterwards. But despite how quickly it all fell apart, you can't deny that the Heat put together one of the most dominant 4-year stretches in the history of the league during that run with the Heatles. Which brings us to the 2014 champions, the San Antonio Spurs. By the time they made the 2014 finals, it had been 7 years since their last title, their longest drought in a 15-year stretch of championship contention. They'd gotten really close in recent seasons, losing to the Thunder one year, and then the Heat repeat in the finals the following year on the Ray Allen shot, so they went into the 2013-14 season on a mission. Of course, the biggest difference between this era of Spurs basketball and the mid-2000s versions was the addition of Kawhi Leonard. After acquiring him on draft night in 2011 in exchange for George Hill, Kawhi had continued to develop into an incredibly impactful player for San Antonio and looked like a future star. Playing nearly 37 minutes a game in the finals the year before as a second-year player and matching up with LeBron for most of the series. Other than Kawhi, most of the faces in San Antonio that year were very familiar. Tim Duncan, Tony Parker, Manu Ginobili, all now in their 30s, but this version of the Spurs, fueled by the disappointment of the finals loss the year before, is one of the best Spurs teams of all time and one of the most terrifying and stylistically beautiful teams of the decade. Their formula: lead the league in assists, be second in field goal percentage, first in three-point percentage, and have nobody play more than 30 minutes a night or average more than 17 points per game and just go and win 62 games. That kind of record without heavily relying on any one player is almost impossible to replicate and help them stay remarkably healthy for a team with such an aging core. In the playoffs, they weirdly struggled with Dallas in round one, but then mostly cruised through the postseason on their way to destroying the Heat in 5 games in the finals, ending the LeBron era in Miami in the process, with Kawhi Leonard earning finals MVP and making it clear that he would lead the next era of Spurs basketball. And you might think that because of their age, that was really the last great Spurs team as the core of the team aged, but that was not the case at all. They won 55 games the next year after losing in 7 in the first round to a really good Clippers team behind a Chris Paul buzzer beater. They won 67 games in the 15-16 season as Kawhi won his second straight Defensive Player of the Year award before losing to a really talented athletic Thunder team with Kevin Durant and Russell Westbrook at the top of their games in the second round, and then they made it back to the conference finals in 2017 before getting swept by the Warriors, once again by Kevin Durant. And the entire time, they just kept making changes when they needed to compete. They prioritized Kawhi more as he improved offensively, ultimately becoming an MVP caliber player in the 2016-17 season, and added players like LaMarcus Aldridge in free agency while Duncan and the rest of the old guys aged. And even after Duncan retired in 2016, like I said, they were still awesome in the 2016-17 season and were leading the Durant-led Warriors in game 1 of that series before Kawhi got hurt. And really what happened to the Spurs was just a couple of freak situations. They were still competing in a loaded Western Conference all the way through this time period until Kawhi got hurt. It really didn't matter if Duncan retired or the other guys got old and or left. That trade that they made in 2011 to get Kawhi helped them maintain their status as one of the best teams in the league. But once he hurt his ankle in that 2017 postseason, things went sideways. He ultimately requested a trade from the team a few years later after struggling with injuries, and that is ultimately what ended their run of contention. If he had never gotten hurt, they would have had a really good chance in the series against Golden State in 2017, as evidenced by most of game 1 of that series, and with a fully healthy and ideally happy Kawhi, they could have continued to reload the roster to try and win titles, just as they had been able to do with Duncan. Of course, it didn't happen that way, but again, you can't really fault the Spurs for not being able to keep things going beyond 2017. Next up is one of the most out-of-nowhere NBA champions ever, the 2015 Golden State Warriors. It might seem strange now, considering they've been one of the most successful organizations in the league from this 2015 season on, but the Warriors weren't always a great franchise. They were coming off of a solid 51-win season the year before, but even with new head coach Steve Kerr in charge, expectations were low for a team that had just won 2 playoff series total since 1991 at the time. Of course, they were led by Steph Curry and Klay Thompson, a core that really solidified itself under former head coach Mark Jackson, but there were important changes within the team that allowed them to win 67 games in Steve Kerr's first year as head coach in the 2014-15 season. Firstly, Draymond Green emerged as the defensive anchor of the team as he took over a starting spot following injuries to David Lee, and it was immediately clear just how valuable he would be in that role. They also moved Andre Iguodala into a bench role, allowing for his playmaking and scoring to really shine in second units, and that, along with great seasons from Steph, Klay, and various veterans on the roster, allowed the Warriors to finish with the best record in the league and for Curry to win the MVP, solidifying themselves as one of the most dominant teams in the league, with the second best offensive rating and the best defensive rating in the league. But going into the playoffs, there was still plenty of skepticism that a, quote, jump shooting team could actually win a title. They swept the Pelicans in round 1, came back from down 2-1 in round 2 against a physical Grizzlies team to win in 6 games, and handled the Rockets in 5 games to reach their first finals since 1975. Waiting for them was the Cleveland Cavaliers, as LeBron had rejoined the team in the 2014 offseason, and alongside Kyrie Irving and Kevin Love, they were one of the best teams in the league that season. However, Love and Irving both got hurt that postseason, and despite a tough fight in 6 games, they could not overcome the Warriors, who would win the 2015 2016 title and set themselves up to appear in every single NBA Finals for the rest of the decade. In terms of how this particular team fell apart, without stepping too much on the sections coming up, essentially it just came down to their own decisions. After losing to the Cavs in the 2016 Finals, they had the opportunity to bring in Kevin Durant as a free agent. Of course, they took it, but they had to give up a lot of important pieces of the team, like Andrew Bogut and Harrison Barnes, to create the cap space to bring in Durant. They still had plenty of success, which I'm going to get to in a bit, but that version of the Warriors, they really took the league by storm in the 2014-15 season, really only lasted 2 years as a championship contender. Which brings us to the 2016 champions, the Cleveland Cavaliers. As I mentioned in the previous section, the Cavs were entering a new era with LeBron rejoining the team in 2014 and trading for star forward Kevin Love that offseason as well. Their first year together, just like with LeBron in Miami, was a disappointment with injuries to both Love and Kyrie in the 2015 playoffs. However, things changed for them in the 2015-16 season. Most notably, their coaching situation changed dramatically mid-season. In January, despite having the best record in the East at the time, they decided to fire head coach David Blatt and promote Ty Lue to that position, a completely unprecedented move for a team that was 2 games away from winning a title just months before. That move, in addition to a massive amount of roster changes since LeBron arrived in 2014, led to a lot of speculation that this Cavs team would never be able to recover in time and create enough chemistry to win a title in that season. Their record the rest of the year with Lue as head coach was pretty similar to when Blatt was the head coach, and they went into the postseason as the #1 seed and honestly pretty much cruised to the finals, beating the Pistons, Hawks, and Raptors, all while losing just 2 games, both to Toronto in the conference finals. They found themselves back in the finals once again against the Golden State Warriors, but this time they were fully healthy. But through 4 games, it honestly didn't seem to matter all that much, as the Warriors were riding high on the confidence of their title win the year before to take a 3-1 lead in the series. However, at the end of Game 4, Draymond Green and LeBron had to be separated, and Green was later charged with a flagrant foul after the game and a review by the league, which resulted in him being suspended for Game 5 for committing 4 flagrant fouls in a single postseason. From there, the Cavs took over, with Kyrie and LeBron putting up huge performances to force a Game 7 back in Cleveland, where Kyrie would hit one of the most iconic shots in the history of basketball to clinch the 3-1 comeback and allow LeBron to finally bring a title to Cleveland. Ironically, Kyrie would also be the reason that this entire era of Cavs basketball would completely collapse. Unhappy with his situation, he nearly requested a trade in the 2016 offseason, just months removed from winning the title. After losing to the Warriors in the 2017 finals, Kyrie did request a trade, being moved to the Celtics in exchange for an injured Isaiah Thomas, among other pieces. And with that move, the Cavs' chances of winning a title were pretty much gone. They did their best in the 2017-18 season and made it back to the 2018 finals, but after losing once again, LeBron left for the Lakers in the 2018 offseason, and after all of that, their championship team was gone. The reasons for Kyrie wanting to leave the Cavs, other than just general unhappiness, not wanting to play with LeBron, not really wanting to be in Cleveland and wanting to pick where he could play, it just never really added up in terms of requesting a trade so soon after winning a title. That 2017 team, despite the finals loss, was arguably the best Cavs team of that era, and the only team that could really stop them was, of course, the Warriors. But with his trade request, Kyrie set events in motion that would essentially end that era of Cavs basketball. Which, of course, means it's time to talk about the one team that the Cavs just could not beat, the 2017 and 2018 Golden State Warriors. After losing to Cleveland in embarrassing fashion in 2016, the Warriors shook up their roster in a big way, adding Kevin Durant as a free agent to a team that had just won 73 games, an all-time NBA record. Although Durant was and still is mocked for making that decision, joining a record-breaking team that he also just lost a 3-1 lead to in the previous postseason, it undoubtedly made them the most terrifying team in the league, and that season they would go on to solidify themselves as possibly the best NBA team of all time. Adding KD to the shooting that team had, with the defense of players like Draymond with great role players still, and having to guard both Steph and KD on the floor at the same time, it was simply unfair. The only real challenge that the teams in 2017 or 18 faced was either the Kawhi-led Spurs that I mentioned earlier, who were up big in Game 1 in 2017 before the Kawhi injury, and the James Harden Houston Rockets, who were up 3-2 on the Warriors in the second round of 2018 before a collapse that included nearly 30 straight missed threes. And although both of those teams, the Rockets especially, showed that the Warriors could be beat, the margin for error was just so slim against a team that was so talented. They proved just how dominant they were in 2017 by sweeping their way to the finals and losing just one game once they got there. A 16-1 postseason record that honestly is hard to comprehend, especially when you consider just how good that 2017 Cavs team was. Then with the trade of Kyrie Irving in the 2017 offseason, the Cavs, their main competition, was much worse the following season, and although as I mentioned they had some issues with the Rockets, they went 16-5 that postseason and swept the Cavs
in the finals.
However, things were starting to get tenuous in Golden State even with all of the success.
Durant never really felt like he got any credit for winning the titles with Golden State because of how good they were when he got there, and him and Draymond Green's relationship started to suffer as a result. The following 18-19 season, they were still very good, but the cracks were really starting to show. By the time the 2019 playoffs came around, the rumors about KD leaving as a free agent that offseason had really heated up, and it would prove to be a grueling postseason run for the team. They couldn't escape a ton of injuries to key players. All three of Klay, Curry, and Durant dealt with one issue or another during the 2019 playoffs. And yes, they still managed to reach the finals, of course, simply because they were still so talented. But after losing KD to an Achilles tear and Klay to a torn ACL during the finals, even Steph's brilliance wasn't enough as they lost in 6 games to the Raptors. But even in defeat, being able to overcome the issues within the team and all the injuries that they did and still come within 2 games of winning a 3rd straight title shows you just how insanely good those Warriors teams were. Of course, KD did end up leaving the team in the 2019 offseason, joining the Nets as they sent back D'Angelo Russell in a sign-in trade. The Warriors would go through a period of transition as they dealt with some injury-riddled seasons, but would come out the other side, and with some great moves like adding Andrew Wiggins and a trade for D'Lo, they won the 2022 title over Boston, solidifying that even if one championship team falls apart, first the 2015 version without KD and then the 2019 version with KD, with Steph, Klay, and Draymond together and healthy, they were the defining team and organization in the league.
Which brings us to our final entry, the 2019 Toronto Raptors.
Despite being a good team for years, they never really had established themselves as true championship contenders in the 2010s. They won 48 or more games every season starting in 2013, but their best players, DeMar DeRozan and Kyle Lowry, struggled to show up in the postseason. And even once they did improve their roster in a meaningful way around those guys, they simply couldn't get past one thing: LeBron James. They lost to the Cavs in 3 straight playoffs in 16, 17, and 18, and seemed destined to always come in second place. However, LeBron left to go west to LA in the 2018 offseason, and the Raptors saw an opportunity to finally break through. But some threats still remained. The Sixers were ready to compete behind Joel Embiid, and Giannis had emerged as an MVP candidate in Milwaukee, both of which were seen on the same level as the Raptors by the time LeBron left. As a result, they did something that rarely ever happens in the NBA. They made a trade in the 2018 offseason that led directly to a championship.
They traded DeMar DeRozan, Jakob Poeltl, and a future first-round pick for Kawhi Leonard and Danny Green in a massive trade with tons of risk at the time.
Kawhi wasn't healthy, had requested a trade from the Spurs, and would be a free agent in the following 2019 offseason. If this went poorly, the Raptors would be just an average team in the East and have given up valuable assets for basically nothing. But if it went well, they could finally break through and win a title. And as it turned out, Kawhi got healthy, was one of the best players in the league, and the Raptors roster fit perfectly around him as they went on a great postseason run, highlighted by a crazy Game 7 win against the Sixers on a Kawhi game winner, and coming back from down 0-2 to the Bucks in the conference finals before taking down the Warriors, who, yes, were dealing with a ton of injuries, as I mentioned in the previous section, but they went on to win their first title in franchise history. This was a great moment for the team, but immediately their thoughts turned to the offseason, where Kawhi was long rumored to be favoring a move to LA and leaving the team in free agency. Ultimately, despite seriously considering a return to Toronto, Kawhi signed with the Clippers, and the Raptors lost their best player and any chance of winning a title. They did still manage to be a good team and establish themselves as one of the best organizations in the league, but they could never overcome the loss of Kawhi because it was simply impossible, rounding out what happened to every NBA champion of the 2010s.